Hi there, and welcome to the Creative Operations Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Groome, and in this podcast, we'll be talking with creative operations leaders in all kinds of industries, from franchising to finance, from healthcare to hospitality and beyond. We'll be looking to uncover best practices and to see trends that are coming to help you keep your creative operations on brand and on budget at the same time. Enjoy.
Hey, welcome everybody to this episode of the Creative Operations Podcast 2.0. I'm your host, Kevin Groome, and today we're doing a solo episode to talk about a topic that's become a bit of a favorite with me, and that is the cost of one-off design requests. A few months ago, we did a podcast on this very topic. There's a link to it in the comments below, so you can, pick it up there if you like. And in that podcast, we talked about how one-off design requests impose a lot of different, what I called submerged costs upon a creative operations team. Things like brand compliance, employee burnout, often distraction from higher level strategic and creative tasks. So lots and lots of costs. And that's what we really focused on regarding one-off design requests in that podcast some time ago. Today, though, I wanted to talk about the visible costs of one-off design requests, the very practical amount of time that it takes for a creative operation of any size to be able to take in a small but urgent design request and respond to it on the timeframes and with the care and attention to detail that pretty much every creative job requires. So to do that, I wanted to set the stage first and then dive into a little bit of a calculator that we set up and that we provide access to if you'd like to use it in the comments below. You'll find a link. So to set the context for that, though, the above the line visible costs of a one-off design request are much more than just the time it takes a graphic designer, a professional in that world, to actually execute a request. There's everything that surrounds that as well. The touch points between the customer and the creative operation, between the project manager and the graphic designer, between the graphic designer and the proofreader or copy editor, between all of those folks and the project manager again, who needs to return that finished request or draft request back to the original customer. And so those aspects of the job tend to substantially increase the amount of time that a one-off design request really requires. Even something that a graphic designer could execute in a couple minutes can add up to a half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, or more. So to make that plain, I wanted to walk through a calculator that we set up and that I often use when we're asked to do one-off design requests so I can get a sense of what a typical experience is for one of our customers. So to do that, I'm going to share my screen right here. I called it the shocking costs of one-off design requests because for me, almost always, the notion that something that only takes a couple minutes actually consumes an hour or more of professional time is always, even after all this time that I've been doing it, is still a bit of a surprise. So let's see if we can answer this. I'm going to put in here, we're going to walk through this calculator and see what you guys think of it. So first we'll give this a name. We're going to call this the podcast one-off calculation. And here are the questions we're going to walk through. First, we have to get a sense of the cost of our operation. And so we ask for the salary of an average studio design team member. Generally speaking, this will vary from one part of the country to another, from one organization to another. Here's a number that I use for a junior designer in the New York metro area. That's $70,000 a year. Next, the fully burdened cost factor. Again, it sounds like accountants, but don't worry, it doesn't get too much into the world of green eye shades. But a fully burdened cost factor takes into account healthcare, benefits, vacation, and all the other things that really add up to the cost of having a human being on your team. Generally speaking, that's expressed as a percentage of base salary, so that the two things, the benefits and the salary, add up to 120%. That's the number I'm using. You may use a different number. You may use just 100%, but sometimes it's actually more than that. Depends on your organization. Next, markup factor. The markup factor is something that may or may not apply to your creative operation. Here's what we've seen. In large enterprises, even somewhat meaningfully sized enterprises, often the creative team needs to charge back to the requesting department some sort of a cost factor so that they can account for their use of corporate resources. And they will do so at some percentage of their base cost. Generally speaking, here's what we've seen. External agencies use a cost factor of 2.5 times the cost of an employee, or 250%. In-house groups may use a smaller cost factor simply because they're trying to be a more efficient response to creative needs than an external agency might be. But for you guys at IHAF, that's a in-house agency form, one of our more popular segments in the listener community. But for you guys in-house operations, you may use a lower markup factor, but you probably wouldn't use something less than 100%. For now, I'm going to use 175% as my markup factor. Now, available billable hours. Anybody who operates an in-house agency knows that billable hours are sort of the currency of the day. Generally speaking, I do not use the lawyer's 2,000 hours per year. I tend to go with 1,800 as the total available time that a creative resource might have to devote to customer or client tasks. And right below that 1,800 number is an efficiency rate. That is, of those 1,800 hours, how much time can a human being reasonably spend just executing the work? What you have to subtract from that total is the inevitable meeting time and a little bit of downtime. So we express that as some fraction of 100%. If you're perfectly efficient, remember, in physics, nothing's perfectly efficient, and I think it's true with humans too. But in really highly efficient, highly demanding organizations, we see efficiency rates around 85%. But generally speaking, unless you are a lawyer who knows how to bill 2,000 hours and get 100% efficiency or 85% efficiency or very close there too, here's a number that I would use just to be reasonable, 75%. Remember, you can use this to play with the numbers as you see fit to match your creative operations, but we do think that an efficiency factor is an important thing to keep in mind. Here's one reason why I say that. One of the things about being inundated with one-off design requests, and we talked about this in that prior podcast, it's a little bit demoralizing for a creative team that is really in the world of creative operations to do creative and strategic tasks. So when you think about establishing a high billable hours availability and a high efficiency rate that gets devoted to one-off design requests, you tend to leave yourself open for a little bit of employee churn that might be unfortunate. So that's why I tend to back off from that a little bit. An old agency partner of mine used to say, you can smell smoke from the studio when there's too much chaos, too much one-off activity going on all at once. So keep an eye on that. Now, we're about halfway through, so hang in there with me. The next set of questions in the calculator are about your typical one-off design request. And I know, of course, every request is unique unto itself. So this is really trying to establish an average. Here's what I'd recommend. Use the tool a bunch of different times. There's no cost to doing it and only takes a few minutes when I'm not blabbing away here about how to use the tool. Use it to look at different kinds of one-off design requests if you like. So what I'm going to do is look at a really simple one that I think the studio wouldn't need much time on. Okay. So let's assume that's something like a relatively simple ad resize. I'm going to take a social media advertisement that's sized at 1280 by 720, and I'm going to turn it into a 960 by 640. But I'm not really going to change much content other than that. That's the thing to keep in mind as a target. So first thing, how long does it take my project manager to take this job in and to understand it properly from the submitting customer or client? Generally speaking, that's an email or a phone conversation, or it might be, if you've got a creative brief form that you use in your enterprise, it might be reviewing that form. I would say that the time it takes for the project manager to really understand this, 10 minutes. Next. Now that I understand the job as a project manager, I've got to transmit that into the studio so that it can be opened up as a job ticket on Monday.com or a Basecamp or a project management platform, and it's slotted into a schedule. So now we know when it's going to actually be executed. Generally speaking, we find that the use of these project management tools is not time free. It takes some time to use this. So I'm going to add another 10 minutes just for the transmission of the task. But now I've got a job that we understand and that we've got ticketed. It's ready for the studio. How long does it take the studio to take a 1280 by 720 ad and turn it into a 960 by 640? Here's my thinking. And you can vary on this, so have no fear. I'm going to put 15 minutes in there. That's pretty quick for a designer who has to look in the dam to find the asset in question, who needs to determine the right type size to use as they reduce the size of everything in that ad, and then finally to check their work. 15 minutes is moving pretty swiftly. You might differ on that, so use any number you see fit. Next. We've got 2 slots in here for revisions and review and the time it takes to revise and review these things. You might decide to put 0 because you're perfect. At least in my experience, I never have been. So what I say is my total amount of time for a revision round is about half what I spent on the first round. So I'm going to go from 35 minutes to 15 minutes. And then why do I have a second round of revisions? Here's why. Almost always in the first round, our customers discover something that they didn't think about when they first submitted the task. Something emerges. I always allow a little bit of time for that. And I'm going to allow 10 minutes there. But now I should be done. The job should be complete. Customers should be happy. I have just one last thing. I have to account for this job. Using the project management system, I have to prepare either, if I'm an agency, an invoice for my customer, or if I'm an in-house group, I have to provide a chargeback record so that the time that I'd spent for the benefit of the customer can be properly accounted for. And I'm going to add another 10 minutes for that. Last, how many of these jobs do I get per month? Well, that will vary for you guys, but here's what we've seen across the entire customer base at Pike & Nine. We see one-off design requests really starting to eat into creative operations teams when they get above 100 job requests in any given month. So I'm going to start at the lowest end, really, of where automated systems start to become a real need and see how that works. And then finally, I'm just going to insert my email address. By the way, you guys can record that if you want to email me. We'd love to hear from you. And I'm going to email myself a copy of my submission so I have it. Now, let me go and find my email. I'm not going to show you my desktop because it's an utter mess, but I'm going to see if I can find my email because Campaign Drive and the team should have given me an analysis of this submission that I just provided. Sure enough, here it is. Here we can see all of our inputs. So here's the email that the system just delivered to me. I put it into a Word document so that we'd be able to read it a little bit better. And here's what it communicates. Based on my inputs, a one-off design request would require a charge back to the customer of $127. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of money. I don't think it sounds like a lot of money for a professional to actually produce a creative unit for me to work with in the marketplace. But that's the number. And based on the volume of those requests, that $127 turns into $12,700 in departmental chargebacks over the course of a month, or $152,000 and change over the course of a whole year. Let's pause on that for just a moment. We're spending, or we're charging our customers effectively the cost of a full-time individual and then some to execute one-off design requests that are largely mechanical in nature. And those are the costs that the organization is bearing. And That doesn't include all those below the line costs that we talked about before and that we talked about in our previous podcasts. These are just the costs we have to share with our customers in order to account properly for our creative operations. And what you'll see, this is a shameless plug for Campaign Drive, but you'll see that in this email, we're suggesting that a self-service approach, which eliminates most of that surround sound touch point kind of activity that occurs around any one-off design request, you can eliminate all of that for about $30,000 a year. Or in this particular example, that's a reduction in hard costs of about 80%. So we would love for you guys to look in the comments below here and click on that link and tell us a little bit about your experience with one-off design requests. Here's what we don't know and can't know because we're not you. How many of these requests do you get a month? How big are your one-off design requests? And what kind of variability from really simple to really complex do you see? Because for each organization, the point at which an automated self-service approach will work varies. That's it for today. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Creative Operations Podcast. And we will look forward to seeing you either using our calculator or at the next episode. Thanks. Have a great day.